Today, we stand at a crossroads in global geopolitics, where economic aggression collides with our unwavering resolve for sovereignty, where tariffs attempt to dictate policy, yet our spirit only strengthens in its resolve. The announcement of a 50% tariff on Indian exports by the United States under President Donald Trump was nothing short of a political thunderbolt and an economic earthquake. For decades, the economic ties between Washington and New Delhi have been shaped by mutual cooperation, cautious pragmatism, and at times friction. But this latest measure, unveiled on August 27, 2025, was not simply a matter of trade policy. It was a calculated move aimed at punishing India for continuing its energy purchases from Russia despite repeated American warnings. While the tariff officially came in the form of a trade measure, its deeper roots were political, reflecting an attempt to use economic pressure to influence India's foreign policy decisions. For India, however, the 50% tariff was both a challenge and an opportunity, a moment that revealed the vulnerabilities of its economy while simultaneously testing the resilience of its leadership and its long-standing policy of strategic autonomy. The tariff targeted a wide range of Indian exports that have historically provided livelihood to millions of workers. Textiles, garments, jewelry, footwear, chemicals, furniture, and other labor-intensive sectors bore the brunt of the new U.S. duties. These industries are not just significant contributors to India's export earnings, they are also crucial employers in small towns and rural areas. When a small garment exporter in Tirupur or a jeweler in Surat suddenly faces a 50% tariff barrier in their largest or second largest foreign market, the consequences ripple across entire communities. Orders shrink, margins collapse, and workers face layoffs. Economists quickly estimated that the impact of the tariff could shave off nearly 1 percentage point from India's GDP growth, a sharp reminder of how vulnerable emerging economies remain to global trade shocks. In practical terms, this meant fewer jobs, tighter cash flows, and a dampening of India's ambitious growth trajectory. The Trump administration defended the tariff as a necessary punishment for what it termed India's funding of Russia's war machine. The White House argued that by continuing to import Russian crude oil, New Delhi was indirectly financing Moscow's war effort in Ukraine. Yet Indian officials countered this argument by pointing out the hypocrisy in Washington's approach. India is far from the only country purchasing Russian oil. European nations and other U.S. allies have also continued imports in one form or another. To single out India for such a severe tariff response, they argued, was disproportionate and politically motivated. This selective targeting revealed that the tariffs were less about oil and more about pressuring India into aligning more tightly with U.S. foreign policy. But for a nation that has consistently valued its independence in global affairs, such coercion was unacceptable. India's response to the tariff shock was both defiant and pragmatic. Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his cabinet immediately condemned the tariffs as unjustified, stressing that India would not bow to external pressure. Instead of signaling retreat, Modi used the moment to double down on the Make in India campaign, urging citizens to support local products and reduce dependence on foreign markets where political strings often come attached. The government simultaneously began preparing measures to cushion the blow: tax relief for affected exporters, easier access to credit, loan restructuring, and special incentives to diversify into new markets across Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia, and Europe. Trade officials also reached out to Washington in hopes of negotiating a rollback of the tariffs, but they did so without compromising India's energy and security interests. At the same time, the tariffs accelerated India's pivot toward new partnerships. Recognizing the risks of overdependence on the U.S. market, New Delhi actively sought to deepen ties with other major economies. Japan promised tens of billions in new investments, while China and Russia explored new opportunities for cooperation in critical minerals, infrastructure, and logistics. These moves were not meant to abandon ties with the U.S., but rather to rebalance India's global relationships in a way that ensured it would not be left at the mercy of unilateral American policies. The shock of the 50% tariff was therefore not only an economic challenge, but also a defining geopolitical test. It reminded India of the fragility of global trade systems, the risks of weaponized tariffs, and the urgency of strengthening domestic industry and diversifying trade partners. It also reaffirmed the principle that India's foreign policy cannot and will not be dictated by external pressure, no matter how powerful the source. In the long run, this episode may well become a turning point that forces India to push harder for self-reliance while simultaneously accelerating its integration into a multipolar global order. Far from being a moment of weakness, the tariff shock could end up forging a stronger, more resilient India when the United States announced a sweeping 50% tariff on Indian exports. The initial reaction in New Delhi was not panic, but determination. India, under Prime Minister Narendra Modi's leadership, responded firmly and decisively, signaling to the world that its economic and political sovereignty would not be compromised under external pressure. The government quickly recognized that this move by Washington was not simply about trade. It was an attempt to exert political influence over India's strategic choices, particularly its continued purchase of Russian oil. Rather than capitulating, India chose to reaffirm its independence, defending its right to pursue energy security and economic stability on its own terms. This defiance was not reckless, it was measured, strategic, and deeply rooted in India's long-standing policy of non-alignment and autonomy. The first aspect of India's response was rhetorical but powerful. Modi's administration condemned the tariffs as punitive, discriminatory, and unjustified. Officials pointed out that India had been unfairly singled out when other nations, including key American allies in Europe and Asia, continued trading with Russia without facing similar penalties. The message was clear: India would not accept double standards, nor would it allow its policies to be dictated by foreign capitals. This firm diplomatic stance was crucial in reassuring both domestic audiences and global partners that India would stand its ground. At the same time, India's response was not limited to rhetoric. On the economic front, the government rolled out a series of measures designed to cushion the blow for exporters and industries directly affected by the tariffs. Recognizing that sectors like textiles, gems, jewelry, and footwear would suffer the most, New Delhi introduced targeted tax relief packages, expanded loan facilities, and announced export incentives to ease financial stress. These measures were meant to keep small and medium-sized businesses afloat, protect jobs, and preserve the competitiveness of Indian goods in alternative markets. By moving quickly, the government showed that it was prepared to shield its citizens from the harshest effects of the U.S. decision. Equally important was India's push to diversify its trade partnerships. The tariffs served as a wake-up call, underlining the risks of relying too heavily on one market, no matter how large. In response, India accelerated efforts to expand exports to Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia, and the European Union. Trade negotiations with several countries were fast-tracked, and diplomatic missions abroad were tasked with promoting Indian products and securing new agreements. This diversification strategy was not just reactive, it was a long-term vision aimed at building resilience and ensuring that India's economy could withstand geopolitical turbulence. Beyond trade diversification, India also turned the moment into an opportunity to strengthen its domestic economy. Modi revived the Make in India campaign with renewed vigor, urging citizens to support local products and industries. The message was not simply nationalist rhetoric. It was a call to reduce dependency on foreign markets where political pressures often interfere with fair competition. By promoting self-reliance, India aimed to transform this external shock into a catalyst for industrial growth, innovation, and job creation at home. On the diplomatic front, India remained pragmatic. While rejecting Washington's unilateral tariffs, New Delhi did not close the door to dialogue. Indian trade negotiators reached out to their American counterparts, seeking a rollback of the measures while emphasizing the mutual benefits of U.S.-India trade. India made it clear that it valued its partnership with the United States, but would not compromise its national interests. This balanced approach highlighted India's ability to be firm without being confrontational, assertive without being reckless. Perhaps the most significant dimension of India's firm response was its pivot toward new strategic partnerships. Modi embarked on a tour of Asia, engaging with Japan, China, and Russia. In Japan, he secured major investment pledges worth billions focused on infrastructure, critical minerals, and advanced manufacturing. With China and Russia, he explored opportunities for closer economic ties, particularly in energy, logistics, and technology. These moves were not designed to replace the U.S. partnership, but to rebalance India's foreign policy, ensuring it had multiple options and reducing vulnerability to unilateral actions from any single power. In sum, India's firm response to the 50% tariff was a blend of defiance and pragmatism. By standing its ground, supporting its exporters, diversifying trade ties, and seeking new alliances, India demonstrated resilience in the face of economic coercion. The episode reinforced India's image as a country that values sovereignty above all, one that will not be bullied into compliance, and one that has the vision and capacity to turn crises into opportunities. The tariffs may have been designed to weaken India, but in reality, they strengthened its resolve, forcing it to innovate, adapt, and assert itself more confidently on the world stage. The imposition of a 50% tariff by the United States did more than shake India's export markets. It accelerated a dramatic reorientation of its foreign policy and trade strategies. Faced with Washington's heavy-handed approach, New Delhi recognized that it could no longer afford to remain overly dependent on one partner. Instead, it turned eastward, seeking new opportunities and building deeper alliances with nations across Asia. This pivot was not a sudden departure from India's existing trajectory. It was a natural evolution of a strategy rooted in pragmatism, self-interest, and the pursuit of a balanced multipolar world. By reaching out to China, Russia, and Japan, India signaled its intent to diversify its economic and political relationships, ensuring that it would never again be left vulnerable to unilateral measures from any one country. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's tour of Asia in the days following the tariff announcement was symbolic as much as it was practical. His first stop was Japan, a long-standing partner with whom India shares a history of trust and cooperation. During his visit, Japan pledged up to $68 billion in investments spanning infrastructure development, advanced manufacturing, and critical mineral supply chains. This was more than just an economic arrangement. It was a strategic partnership aimed at reducing both nations' dependence on China while simultaneously ensuring resilience in industries vital to future growth. For India, Japanese capital and technology represented a much-needed boost to its Make in India initiative, while for Japan, India provided a massive market and a reliable partner in Asia's shifting geopolitical landscape. The pivot, however, did not stop at Japan. Modi's visits to China and Russia demonstrated India's willingness to engage with all major powers, even those it has had disagreements with in the past. With China, relations have often been strained due to border tensions and competition in the Indo-Pacific, yet Modi's outreach was pragmatic. Economic cooperation in areas like rare earth minerals, green energy, and cross-border trade could help both nations address vulnerabilities created by Western pressures. By easing certain trade barriers and exploring joint investment opportunities, India signaled that it was willing to compartmentalize political differences when mutual economic benefit was at stake. This was a clear message to the world. India would not allow old rivalries to dictate its future when strategic needs demanded flexibility. Engagement with Russia was even more significant in the context of the U.S. tariffs. India had been penalized precisely because of its continued purchase of Russian oil, yet instead of retreating, Modi sought to deepen ties with Moscow. Energy cooperation remained central, but discussions also expanded to infrastructure, defense, logistics, and critical technologies. This was not just about energy security, it was about reaffirming a decades-old partnership that has historically been crucial to India's strategic autonomy. By standing firm with Russia, even under U.S. pressure, India reinforced the principle that its foreign policy is guided by national interest, not by external dictates. This pivot to the East was also about creating a larger ecosystem of alliances. By strengthening economic ties with Japan, China, and Russia, India positioned itself as a central player in a new Asian economic order. Such diversification reduced its exposure to Western sanctions or tariff shocks and provided access to alternative markets, capital, and technology. At the same time, it allowed India to play the role of a bridge, engaging with powers often at odds with one another while maintaining its independence. Domestically, this reorientation boosted confidence in India's long-term strategy. Citizens and businesses saw that their government was not simply reacting to a crisis, but using it as an opportunity to create new avenues for growth. The diversification of partnerships meant that exporters who lost access to the U.S. market could look toward Asia for new opportunities. It also meant that investments flowing into India from multiple sources would strengthen its industrial base, create jobs, and fuel economic growth. On the global stage, this pivot redefined India's image. No longer seen merely as a partner of the United States in the Indo-Pacific strategy, India positioned itself as an independent pole of power, capable of engaging with all sides without aligning itself fully with any bloc. This flexibility enhanced India's leverage, giving it room to maneuver in negotiations, whether on trade, climate change, or security. It showed that India was not just reacting to American pressure, it was proactively shaping its future. The U.S. tariffs were intended to isolate India and compel it to change course, but instead they had the opposite effect. They pushed India into a more assertive stance, one in which it sought out new partners, deepened existing relationships, and strengthened its role as a leader in Asia by pivoting east and building alliances with Japan, China, and Russia. India demonstrated that no single country could dictate its destiny. Instead, it embraced the reality of a multipolar world where resilience comes not from dependency, but from a broad network of partnerships. Far from weakening India, the tariffs catalyzed a new phase in its rise as a confident, self-reliant global power. The tariff crisis between India and the United States was more than just an economic dispute. It was a profound moment of reflection for policymakers, businesses, and ordinary citizens alike. When Washington suddenly imposed a 50% duty on a wide range of Indian exports, it forced the nation to pause and consider not only the immediate impact, but also the deeper lessons about sovereignty, resilience, and the fragile nature of international partnerships. In moments of crisis, a country often discovers its true priorities and its inner strength. For India, this episode highlighted the urgent need to reassess how it engages with the world, how it builds its economy, and how it asserts its independence in an increasingly polarized global environment. The first and perhaps most important realization was that sovereignty is priceless. The tariffs were explicitly designed to punish India for its independent choices, particularly its decision to continue purchasing Russian oil. Washington's message was clear: if New Delhi did not align with American policy, there would be economic consequences. Yet India's refusal to bow down underscored a larger truth, that a nation's policies must be guided by its own interests, not by the dictates of others. This reaffirmed the principle that India's foreign policy has always cherished a strategic autonomy. Even in the face of steep economic penalties, India chose to defend its right to decide what best serves its people. The reflection here is profound. Independence often carries a cost, but surrendering it carries a far greater one. The second lesson was the fragility of economic dependence. For decades, Indian exporters enjoyed significant access to the American market, which became a major driver of jobs and income for millions. The sudden imposition of tariffs revealed how vulnerable this dependence could make the nation. Entire industries, textiles, gems, footwear, and chemicals were suddenly at risk, not because of their inefficiency, but because of political calculations made thousands of miles away. This vulnerability sparked an important reflection. True resilience comes not from relying on a single partner, but from diversifying markets and strengthening domestic industries. The realization that external powers can weaponize trade reinforced the urgency of self-reliance and economic diversification. Another important takeaway from this crisis was the resilience of the Indian people and their government. Instead of giving in to despair, businesses began exploring new opportunities in Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia. The government introduced targeted relief measures, ensuring that exporters could stay afloat during the transition. Prime Minister Modi's renewed push for Make in India resonated more strongly than ever before, not as a slogan but as a necessity. This demonstrated the adaptability of the Indian economy and the determination of its citizens. It also reminded the nation that resilience is not built in moments of comfort, it is forged in times of trial. The crisis also encouraged reflection on the nature of alliances and friendships in global politics. India has long valued its partnership with the United States, seeing it as a vital counterbalance in the Indo-Pacific and a source of technology and investment. Yet the tariffs showed how quickly such partnerships could be tested when interests diverge. At the same time, India's outreach to Japan, Russia, and even China demonstrated that the global order is not fixed. Relationships shift, alliances evolve, and in a multipolar world, nations must keep multiple doors open. The lesson was clear: India must continue to engage widely, cultivating a diverse set of relationships that safeguard its interests without tying it to the agenda of any single power. Finally, the tariffs prompted a broader societal reflection on unity and purpose. For ordinary citizens, the episode was a reminder that economic security is deeply connected to national strength and independence. The call to support domestic industries was not just about economics, it was about patriotism, about standing together in the face of external pressure. In villages where artisans weave textiles, in factories where small entrepreneurs struggle to keep their businesses alive, and in cities where young innovators dream of global markets, the crisis became a rallying cry. It reminded people that their contributions, however small, are part of a larger story of resilience and national pride. In the end, this moment of reflection revealed both vulnerability and strength. It showed India that while external shocks can cause pain, they can also spark renewal. It reminded the nation of its values, sovereignty, self-reliance, and resilience, and pushed it to act on them more decisively. The tariffs may have been intended to weaken India, but the deeper lesson was that crises are also opportunities. In standing firm, in adapting quickly, and in reflecting honestly, India proved that its destiny will be shaped not by the threats of others, but by its own resolve. The confrontation sparked by Washington's decision to impose a 50% tariff on Indian exports tested the strength of the Indian economy and the determination of its leadership. Yet, rather than leaving the country weakened, it revealed three enduring qualities that have long defined India's rise on the global stage: resolve, resilience, and renewal. These values are not abstract, they are the lifeblood of a nation that has faced centuries of challenge and continues to emerge stronger with every trial. The tariff crisis became a powerful reminder that India's journey toward becoming a global power is not a smooth road. It is a path marked by obstacles, each demanding courage, adaptability, and innovation. Resolve was the first quality that came to the forefront. The United States intended the tariffs to serve as economic punishment, hoping that the shock would force India into abandoning its independent stance on energy imports from Russia. Instead, Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his government responded with clarity and firmness. They declared that India would not compromise on its sovereignty or allow any external power to dictate its choices. This firm posture was not fueled by defiance alone, it was guided by principle. India's long tradition of strategic autonomy, nurtured since independence, dictates that the nation's decisions must always serve its people first. Standing up to the pressure of the world's largest economy required courage, but it also required faith in India's capacity to withstand the consequences. This resolve signaled to the world that India will always protect its right to determine its own path. Even if the cost is high, resilience was the second defining feature of India's response. The tariff struck hard at industries that employ millions, textiles, jewelry, footwear, and chemicals. For small exporters, the shock could have been devastating, yet instead of collapsing under the weight of this challenge, the government and the private sector worked together to adapt. Relief measures such as tax incentives, loan restructuring, and export support provided a safety net, while entrepreneurs began looking for new markets in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Workers, producers, and policymakers showed the capacity to endure hardship while continuing to push forward. This resilience is deeply ingrained in India's story. From overcoming colonial exploitation to navigating global financial crisis, the nation has repeatedly proven its ability to absorb shocks and convert them into opportunities for transformation. The tariff crisis was no exception. It became another test of endurance that India passed with determination. Renewal was perhaps the most important outcome of this difficult period. Instead of allowing the crisis to define India's future in negative terms, it sparked a process of reinvention. The Make in India campaign was reinvigorated, not as a slogan but as a survival strategy, encouraging citizens to prioritize homegrown products and industries. The government renewed its efforts to diversify trade relationships, building stronger ties with Japan, Russia, China, and emerging markets across the global south. These steps were not short-term fixes. They represented a deeper structural shift in how India positioned itself in the world economy. The renewal extended beyond trade. It touched on national confidence, inspiring people to believe that India could not only weather external shocks, but also emerge from them stronger and more self-reliant. Together, these three qualities, resolve, resilience, and renewal, painted a portrait of a nation unwilling to be subdued. They demonstrated that while economic warfare can create pain, it cannot break the spirit of a people united by purpose. Each setback, each attempt at coercion only sharpens India's focus and strengthens its will. The tariff crisis, intended as a blow to India's growth, ended up reinforcing the very qualities that have driven its rise. It reaffirmed that India's destiny lies not in submission, but in perseverance, not in dependency, but in self-confidence, and not in retreat, but in forward movement. As the dust settles, India stands taller, more assured of its place in a rapidly changing global order. Its resolve ensures that it will never compromise its sovereignty. Its resilience guarantees that no external shock can permanently derail its progress, and its capacity for renewal promises that every challenge will be met with creativity, innovation, and a determination to emerge stronger. In the end, the tariff crisis was not just an episode of economic hardship. It was a story of strength. It was a reminder to the world and to India itself that the nation's rise cannot be stopped by threats or coercion. It is propelled by the indomitable spirit of its people, who know that the hardest battles often lead to the most transformative victories. Fellow citizens, let us turn this moment into a catalyst for strength, promote Indian industry, from artisans to innovators, support exporters and small businesses. They are the backbone of our economy. Engage in global partnerships that honor India's strategic vision. Above all, maintain our unity of purpose and enduring spirit. The strongest steel emerges from the hottest fire. We shall not be broken. We shall emerge stronger. Jai Hind!